pieces. And here I'm trying to create some sort of relationship between my training as a miniature painter and how I'm using the same materials, similar scale, and starting from a neutral background. I'm just going to go through this real quick. We can talk about them later. And after I've used all the images online to work for these, to use them for the paintings, I kind of ran out of images. So I ended up buying these plastic drone models online that I would photograph or I would sketch out and then use them for the paintings. It wasn't until later that I started to think that why don't I use these objects as sculptures or some sort of installation? But I had to use shadow with that because that's another issue is it's okay for a two-dimensional work of art to be at that scale, but I realized that when I was working with a three-dimensional object at a similar scale, it kind of took that seriousness away from the work and it became kind of like a toy almost, because they actually are, some of them are actually toys. I worked on animations. I'm not going to go through that. I've done some collaborations. I recently collaborated on a play where I designed the stage for the play. And I'm trying to work more on one-to-one scale. This is a Hellfire missile, which is exactly the scale as, it's exactly my height. So I thought it was kind of interesting. And currently I'm working on a sound installation where I'm going out asking American citizens to say a name of a deceased Pakistani civilian, and I audio record that. And I have 356 names, and I've recorded 1/3 of it so far. So still working on it. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, our next speaker is Samin Farhat, who plays with letters from various texts to produce abstracted epigraphic forms in molds cast from resin. Blurring the boundary between hard plastic and shadow, these sculptures visually collapse the space between the spoken and written word, forcing the viewer to engage in a linguistic puzzle. Please help me welcome Samin Farhat.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here on a Saturday evening, early morning. Even I was like, trying to get here as fast as I can. A little bit about my background. I come from Pakistan and from Karachi, and I moved here to the US in 1992. And of course, I was into arts and doing something, but I played with a lot of materials for painting, printmaking, and all of that. And then I think I'm a late bloomer. Anyway, it took me a long time to be here, with all these wonderful people and my fellow artists and the panelists. And thank you. And thank you for being here and everybody and having this opportunity. So I will cut to the chase and I will come to my work because I know you all want to know about that. But I've been living in Dallas for a long time. I tried to come to New York and be here, but my work is such that like last year and this year I went back to Dallas because I need a lot of space and I need to keep my car and all that. So I was like, okay, New York is not for me. I can just come and visit and all. But anyway, I will go back, I'll come to my work. And what I deal with is I work with language. Language, I think, is a gift that we as human beings have given to ourselves. And what it is that this creativity is a process for me. It keeps me grounded and feel my existence. And art for me is a channeling process through which I let my wandering mind and imagination and my feelings uh, and emotions be captured as sculptures. Language that enables my mind to have the thought processes, whether simple or complex, I find as a gift. What it is that it is through language that we understand about the world, about our existence in time and space, and where we are. And it is also through language that we connect to our past and our present. So, and sometimes, my words deal with the sensical and nonsensical aspect of language. And, sometimes we try to make meanings from some words or things that at that moment we may not be able to understand, but later on we do find meanings and decipher. And sometimes even a language that we don't speak or we don't understand, we can't make much sense of it. But that does not mean that those words are, have no meaning or they are senseless. It's just like, how we see words. And I personally see words as silent or screaming, as shapes in line, in colors, in layers, lucid, transparent, opaque, or translucent, as symbols, as patterns, on stage and as performance, in suspension, as music and melodic, in gyrations, in as whirlwinds, as spirals, tornadoes, swarms, in news as bodies, as woven and intertwined, and many others, right? So this is how I see the language, and this is why I'm making what I'm doing. And of course, there's a lot of politics there too in my work, but I am more interested in, even if there's a politics, I'm more interested in like combining language into my visual vocabulary. And the dialect of my artistic language I speak is cursive, and cursive in nature because, when I started out this work, basically, I mean, cursive, I think it has a lot of connotations and metaphors, but cursive also in the sense that when I first started off using Urdu or those languages, they are very curvilinear, and Nastaliq is of course very cursive and written in that cursive, style. So this creative evolution using symbols and language, it goes back many years. I was always intrigued by how languages evolve from gestures. So, but then it was also my late and beloved father's love, the fanatic love for Ghalib's poetry, like especially throughout the last years of his, ailing life, and he was talking about death and how he's, we all have to come to, sorry, we all have to come to that point, we are all, we are towards, moving towards our final destination, death. So he was always talking about like how, quoting Ghalib, and his poetry. So it was that his fascination with Ghalib and Urdu poetry, and he could also speak Farsi and all, that led me. It was like a personal thing for me to be speaking with him in the poetic language. So it was just a very natural thing for me to look into like Urdu poetry, which when I was growing up, it was everywhere. I mean, it is a tradition of India, Pakistan, and in Iran and all those countries to, poetry and prose, especially poetry. So but in the beginning, what happened, excuse me, I was very much interested in themes like human struggle, and it was also the politics of the time at that time, the philosophical questions about the meaning of life and its difficulties, and the freedom to speak out one's mind, especially women in our part of the world. And although at that time, I was here in the US, but I was going back and forth, and, I could see both cultures from like, being a stranger, being an outsider, and, also a person living in that place. So anyway, it all led me to, Faz Ahmed Faz and Ghalib Urdu poetry, as I said, as Khalil and so many others, I'm sure Shadi, and we all use language and calligraphy or whatever in our work. So what happened that all of this led me to work, use this very famous words by Faiz Ahmed, Faiz, a very renowned Urdu poet. And one of his very famous, I think probably it's kind of like a slogan, word, speak for your lips are free. Bol ke lab azad hai tere. So it was this poetry, the words that I made this installation in 2008, and I did this in Dallas. And you can imagine something like this in Dallas, where you would hardly meet artists from my background and all. Anyway, so I did this installation. It was called Words Without Voices, Forms Without Body. And the idea behind this word is that while these garbed women, while they are all covered, and it was just a gesture. There was no limbs, no face, no nothing. So it was that while you could these women could maybe not walk as freely or something, or maybe they are covered or not, but their mind was still able to think, freely. So, and it had the freedom to think. So this is a piece that I did, and it's an installation. And so I did that one, and then there was in 2009 there was also an incident of this honor killing where these young girls were buried alive. So then I wanted to do another piece. It's called Expulsion, and it is like the internal pain that this woman knelt down, and she's like whatever either the disgust or the pain is coming out. And again, I was using the poetry of Fez, for example. And very soon I felt that I don't need, I'm just talking about the mind and thought process. So I don't even need a body to, a human form to attach to convey my idea. So what happened is that the next thing I started doing is that I was making these just sculptures. They were like wall mounted or hanging in suspension. Like I said, this is how I see languages as shapes and forms. So very quickly, I was just making these sculptures, and I call them speech bubbles. So I was making these, and again, I was using Faiz and Ghalib and all these poetry. And this is like one of the very first sculptures on their own, wall mounted, that I call Masnavis, in black. And then I did another piece. It was like I was listening to Iqbal Bano's, and Faiz Ahmed's Hum Dekhenge, very political poetry. So I wanted to show these, like, this is like women can be like a white tornado, their thought processes, and there's going to be some change. So this is another piece that I did. It's called, and the titles for me are very important. So this one is called Melodic Twister. And these were all like, in the beginning, I was cutting them out by myself using a saw, not laser cut, but a scroll saw, and I was cutting them myself. So I did that, and then later on, I moved to like making cast and molds, and this one is another piece, for example, white smoke and open-ended. And then, at first I started off with black, and okay. Yeah, okay, I guess I need to wrap up quickly. So I'll just talk about very quickly and show the images. So all these colors represent, like, symbolism that are attached to all these works, heated debate. And then I did another one, like idea of the box, box as a discourse, inside and out. These are some of the other works. And then this is also another very important work that I did. It's called Artisan Statement. And the reason behind is like, a good work of art should stand on its own without, much. So it was my part of my artisan statement. And then it was called an artisan statement. And then again, we all have muses, and I sometimes work with some other, like poets, and I have a friend, Red Robin, and I have used a lot of his poetry. So I did also made this piece called The Muse, where I would see words as, however. And I'm also very interested in literature, and Alice in Wonderland, for example, is one very good inspiration. And T.S. Eliot and a lot of, so I was making this, the timeless clock, based on Alice's, adventures, and then her experience of having the tea time at 6 o'clock. So there is no dial here, but I mean, there's a number here, but it's like represents a dial. And then, when Alice shed her gigantic tears, so I could feel like an Alice sometimes, it's all the whatever that, there is politics there, how you feel, even my accent, my complexion, even the words that I'm using, all of that is like, metaphors. And then I would sometimes feel myself as, I mean, we all have muses, and sometimes I am my own muse. So I would think of myself as a whirlwind, or as a just, a breeze, or even like a swarm, and all the words that I use, they are sometimes coming from poetry, sometimes I'm writing them myself, I'm using other people's, or I even use email correspondences. So this is a swarm, and it's called a word swarm. And then, sometimes I would burst like a bubble. So, or, and then from the speech bubbles, lately I was making these pieces, which is like, from the speech bubble to water bubbles. And then I've been referred to my complexion as teak. So, I made this piece on a mirror, and it's called Teak on a Mirror. And then something I wrote myself, and it's called The Black Sleep. It's just about, some kind of infestatious thought. It could be anything. It's a very political piece, but, I'm more interested in the formal and the visual language. So basically, languages evolve, and my work has been evolving, and I'm finding newer and, newer ways of doing, what I'm doing, and I'm, near vocabulary and syntax, and I'm not that interested in grammar. So, and this is the very last installation. It's called Bloodshot is Blood Love, and this installation is like, when we have a blood drop, and I was trying to capture the, falling of the blood drop, and that's what it is. So thank you so much.
Okay, our last speaker is Shazia Sikander, who received her BFA in 1991 from the National College of Arts in Lahore, and her MFA from Rhode Island School of Design in 1995. Her pioneering practice takes Indo-Persian miniature painting as a point of departure. She challenges its strict formal tropes by experimenting with scale and media. Such media include animation, video, mural, and collaboration with other artists. Please help me welcome Shazia Sikander.
It's freezing. Thank you, everybody. Right. It's a little bit of a shame that we don't have, larger screens, because so much of the visual work has to be experienced. But I'm going to show a lot of images, so bear with me. Writing.
is fundamental to my practice. It allows me to reflect a magical thinking of sorts. Out of the amalgamation of visual memory, chaos of experience, and influence of the literary comes amorphous creativity through the act of drawing. This particular work, version of the Signature of Independence, is a play on how authority loses its hierarchy over time. The pentagon, created through geometry, operates as a stalemate. The origins, genetics, histories, and migratory movements are often in play within the dynamics of representations. Urdu, the national language of Pakistan itself, is such a confluence with its base in Indo-Aryan, Hindustani, and its influences from both Arab and Persian languages. Urdu has also gone through a challenging interface with English. For example, emphasis on English as the medium of instruction when I was growing up in Pakistan directly contributed to my loss of a deep grasp of Urdu. This particular work, I Am Also Not My Own Enemy, also references the last post. The phrase itself is taken from Ghalib, but in terms of the last post, it's the bugle call, the colonial call that is still used in a lot of military rhetoric. Drawing is a notational tool. This is actually the reference to the bugle call is also in the work that I made called Bending the Barrels. It was a film done in 2009. For me, the ritualistic engagement with language often comes from the experience that I've had in terms of how certain languages function. So the work on the left here, writing the written, is an illustration when I was experiencing as a child exploring Arabic as a visual notion, because the recitation of the Quran without learning the language created a parallax. On the right is a drawing reminiscent of a ball of barbed wire created from a deliberation of words murder, murdered, murderer in both Arabic and Hebrew. Language is a relevant point of entry for my process. Language of image making, of poetry, of words, of color, of music. The variety of autonomous languages coming together in an experiential manner, I feel, allow the work to be deeply experienced. Especially video works which have original scores. I will share at the end of it a 3-minute clip from a recent work which is on view permanently here at in this image, which is the South Asian galleries at the Philadelphia Art Museum. Disruption as rapture. The work it derives its inspiration from the Gulshan-e-Ishq manuscript, which is basically written in Deccani Urdu, the language of the Muslim elite in South Central India, a North Indian Hindu love story recast as a Sufi tale for an Islamic court. I have explored the notion of the book, the meta book, the illuminated manuscript from a variety of perspectives. This is a show I curated at the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum in 2009, where it evolved into a sculptural artifact. At the Doris Duke Foundation of Islamic Art, it was projected as a medium of light into space. In the current exhibition, the distant lucid dreams and distant visions, the manuscript was created as a foreteller of political events. The work first appeared in New York Times Magazine on September 19, 1999, as part of Imagining the Millennium by Living Artists. So 2 years before September 11th, the work deconstructs various players within Islamic countries and their interface with American foreign policy. Hanan Ashrawi, Asma Jankir, Nawal al-Sadawi are some portraits amongst others. There are many works I made in early 2000s with a political bent in response to the cultural shifts then. several of which were featured in publications like Paris Review, Newsweek, Web. Sorry, the images disappeared. This one is King George on the map of Iraq. I'm not sure. The image is blanked out, so I'm just going to jump into this work. The scroll, which was made in 1989 to 90, was the first public work, technically. It was my thesis work done for the contemporary miniature painting in Pakistan at the National College of Arts. It was more than 5 feet, and it did launch a trend in making large-scale miniatures for successive students' thesis works. I was looking at narrative structure in film and cinema when I laid out the conceptual foundation for the scroll. Satyajit Ray, Hitchcock were early influences on how I juxtaposed the Safavid narrative of light as well as the mysterious interiority of space. Another iteration of the cinematic is parallax, which takes the notion of the scroll as vector and drawing as libretto. A multi-channel video work comprised of many hundreds of drawings, parallax examines mechanisms of power, ideas of conflict and tension over control of strategically desired geography, the Strait of Hormuz, where 1/5 of the world's total oil passes. Parallax addresses geographical, emotional cartographies and how possession, ownership, rule, battles can take place in both a concrete physical location and the elusive terrain of memory and minds. So I came across this image of a multi-valved oil well in 1960s British Petroleum magazine and was surprised to see it called Christmas tree. To me, it did not resemble a Christmas tree from anywhere, and I thought that its name was more a reference to its gift-bearing abilities, irony of the British wit, perhaps. So it decided to build on this idea and create a fully embellished tree from the valves and spools with the chain functioning as garlands. So humor, irony, wit, self-critique are often instrumental in the process. Another iteration of the scroll is the vertical space at the monumental. 66-foot permanent work for the economics department at Princeton. It is full of subversive references, American capitalism, through the work called Big Grits, a nod to Fitzgerald's spiritual dimension of the omniform Vishvarupa, portrait of stasis, portrait of Sirach as Adam Smith, and also reference to historical mirage paintings. In 2000, also there's the motif of mirage in reflective glass, which pops up when there's light in the space and sort of becomes like a black hole when light disappears. So throughout the day, it shifts. In 2014, I made this work and also wrote about it called The World is Yours, the World is Mine. This work explored different modes of storytelling like music, hip hop, poetry, fiction, and painting. Africa is the glowing gold and green heart of the painting, a central stage on which many of the world's issues around resources and economics have played out. So this notion of the globe as the body and Africa as its heart had deep resonance for me, and I wanted to bring that idea into the mural. So here you can see how this reference engages a different site. So here I'm going to end on this particular work, which was done in an abandoned theater, but not necessarily as a work, but more in one of my trips to Sharjah, where I have family, and I have visited an abandoned cinema in Khor-Fakkan. The caretaker that I met had come in 1976 as a laborer to build the building, and his visa was directly linked to the architecture. So this imminent demolishment and death of the building, his home, was deeply disturbing.
as the building fell apart, he spoke of it as if it was still alive and functional. And the theater was his life, his love, his existence was so intricately interwoven with it. It says, Saru hai bawasre azadi giriftari chaman. So the cypress, despite its freedom, is held captive to the garden. And I think this made me think in terms of many poets, especially Mahmoud Darwish. I Have a Seat in the Abandoned Theater, whose evocative imagery of despair and interconnected fate has been deeply resonant also for me. I will switch to the animation that I wanted to share if I have a little bit of help.
So I'll ask all the panelists to come up and have a seat. We'll have a quick discussion. So I think we'll only have time for maybe like 5-10 minutes, maybe max. And then we'll have a quick coffee break. We're running about just 20 minutes late. I hope you'll bear with me. I don't want to cut short any of the other panels, but we'll have a quick conversation and then we'll break for the next panel.
Everybody hear me? Everyone hear me okay? No? Not? Okay. Well, thank you so much for packing so much content into the short time that we gave you to do these talks. And as I said earlier, like I'm really thinking of this, I'm thinking of this as opening up into other conversations. So our conversation here, which will be short, that it expands. That's my productive way.